Hey everyone. Okay, let's take a look at food management. It's pretty basic. We're this chapter is covering various microbes and foodborne illnesses. So let's get to it. Why is this even an issue? Because um, we're we're trying to move healthcare with like hospice, and not only with hospice, but there's this idea that we we want to try to treat patients in the home as opposed to different institutions. Therefore, food's not being um, prepared at these institutions. They're going to be prepared at the home. So there's things that we need to be aware of, especially for people that are older or people that are ill. These are the ones that can least afford to get even a simple gastroenteritis. So 1 in 6 people get foodborne illnesses each year. Oftentimes we don't even recognize it. We just have, it might be diarrhea or even nausea, and that will pass after like a day or even part of a day, and that's kind of it, right? And sometimes they're more serious. It can last for up to up to weeks, right? And so there's different reasons that there's different pathogens that can develop in food. So I've listed some of them here, and viruses and bacteria are the two big pathogens of humans. The vast majority of illnesses are going to be because of viruses or bacteria. But aside from that, in some of our food, we have parasites and toxins from mold or fungus, or even something as simple as like allergens, right? So, um, how can we prevent this? Well, I mean, this down here is going to solve the vast majority of our problems. Wash things, wash everything. Ideally, put it in like pour some vinegar in the water and just put it in there, like fruits and vegetables, for example. Keep things separate. These are things that you already know, and that these are like things that you've already been taught, but they're things that are not followed. We get complacent. We are in a hurry, right? Of course, you don't use the same cutting board for vegetables as you do for meat, and you keep these things away from each other. But even there's cross-contamination with our hands. So when we keep things separate, it's also keeping the areas separate. And ideally, you want to have separate people preparing meat and vegetables, for example, right? And so the temperature, we need to keep the temperature at the right temperature. So you want to get it to 165 at least, and you want to hold it at a high temperature, not hold it at a lower temperature. Um, and then if you're going to chill it, if you're going to put it in the refrigerator, you want to keep it at refrigerator temperature. So, every degree you go up above like 40 degrees Fahrenheit, um, that's a chance for that much more bacteria, for example, to replicate. It's 40 for a reason. There's like a point where you lower the temperature and it goes down, it goes down, it goes down, it goes down. And then once you hit something like 40 degrees, it goes way down. So, 40, 39, 38, there's a reason that it's at that particular temperature and not like, let's say, 20 degrees Fahrenheit, right? It's, that there's kind of like a line where a lot of microbes will be able to grow after a certain temperature. So anyway, let's look at some of the main hazards. So the big one, norovirus, and you've probably heard of that like on cruise ships. That's very, it's not unheard of to have outbreaks of that. Salmonella, you've definitely heard of that. You hear about that with chickens, but there's other ones too: Campylobacter, Clostridium, Staph, E. coli. So this first one, norovirus, it's got the name virus in it, so that's a virus. That's a pretty easy one, right? The rest of these, at least on this slide, are bacteria, right? And you've probably heard of E. coli, but Clostridium is a big one. Some of these, and Staph is actually quite common. So some of these are rather mild as far as the symptoms, but some of them can be very serious. And then sometimes with the case, like if you look down here at listeria can be very serious for certain populations. So if the average person gets it, like let's say if I get it, I'm gonna be sick for a while, but I'll get over it and it'll be fine, right? For pregnant women, it's a different story. So that's why you have to be extra careful with certain populations, right? Because so these can cause birth defects, um, or it can result in death of the fetus. So let's look at some of these a little closer. Norovirus. I'm seeing now that it's hard to read this slide, and so I'll fix it. But it could spread through anything. It spreads through food or water. Viruses can spread, I mean, very, very easily. Think of a flu, right? So how would a flu spread through a kitchen or a restaurant? It's the same thing. It's no different. Or COVID, right? So a lot of time it gets on surfaces and then it's cross contamination, right? And so this is why you get them very easily on cruise ships, because it spreads in the kitchen and then it makes its way out. So again, same things, wash hands often. You should have washing stations all over the kitchen, gloves in kitchens, um, always clean surfaces. You always have to, this is just a general rule, you always have to be very careful with shellfish. They carry a lot of pathogens that other types of food might not have. Don't work sick. I know that this is like a difficult, but if you're running a kitchen, don't let people work sick. And then wash linens. That's something that we don't think about that often. So linens can, now, you know, you might wash dirty linens at the end of the night, but if a linen made it through the night without getting dirty, you might just reuse it, right? No, all of it gets washed at the end of the shift. So let's look at bacterial growth. Norovirus was the virus. Let's look at the other ones, which were bacteria. Bacteria grow pretty fast as well. So in 12 hours, they can go from 1 or 2 bacteria to 1 million. So that's very significant. They like certain conditions. And in general, those conditions are the same conditions that our body has, right? So the pH, the acidity level of our body, that's what they like as well. The temperature of our body, think about what's your temperature, somewhere around 98 degrees. They love that temperature, right? So think about what you can live at. That's what they like. So they prefer a temperature between 40 and 140 degrees. The longer the time, the more they can grow, and it's like exponential growth. And then they love moisture. They love things that are wet. So that's why we always try to keep food dry and cold. Acidity is better when we're talking about controlling bacteria. They don't like things that are too high or too low, but ideally, with the food that we cook, more foods are acidic than basic. So let's look at some of these. Let's look at some of these interactions for some of these bacteria. So salmonella, found in eggs or the shells. I mean, really, what it is, it's fecal. It's fecal to oral route, right? So it's not the egg inside of the egg; it's the shell, but that becomes contaminated as soon as you crack an egg, right? So chicken, the shell, the egg, seafood, and more rarely cheese, right? And so this is usually doesn't cause like a major problem for most people, but for older people, it does, right? So this is going to cause severe dehydration, fever, and anyone that's older or any compromised population, anyone that's already sick, anyone that's receiving healthcare on a daily basis, they're already compromised. So having severe diarrhea is a very big deal, right? Campylobacter jejuni. This word jejuni, that's part of your small intestine. So this is a bacteria that hangs out in the intestines. And so again, this is like a mostly a fecal to oral route, meaning that the droppings from animals end up in food, and then we end up eating that. So drippings from raw chicken, drippings from hamburger, this is often what causes it. Listeria is an exception to the rule, right? So listeria can be grown at a colder temperature. Most bacteria are not going to do well at all at 32 degrees. In fact, they're not going to multiply at all at 32 degrees. Listeria is a little different. It's been able to adapt to this temperature. So ice cream, right? We've had some breakouts just here with Bluebell ice cream, for example, right? And so think about if, a pregnant woman, maybe ice cream is something that they would often eat, right? So they're 10 times more likely to become ill of this because they have a decreased immunity. Why? Because they're growing a baby, right? So, and the other thing about this is that unlike some other pathogens, this one can get transmitted through the placenta. So it could affect the fetus, the baby. Staphylococcus aureus, it's found on 30% of healthy people. So you're looking at a 1 out of 3 chance that it's on me right now somewhere, right? So if you swab a person, they've, 1 out of 3 are going to have staph on them. So staph infections are common. Are they common as a foodborne illness? Not as common as some of these other ones, but staph infections are common. Clostridium botulism. So botulism, that you've probably been taught when you were younger to like watch cans if they're bulging, right? So Clostridium is bacteria that can survive without oxygen, so it's anaerobic. So this makes it perfect for like canned foods, and it's very toxic. This is the thing about it. Remember with bacteria, it's not the bacteria that harm you, it's the toxin made by the bacteria. So bacteria eat and then they produce waste. The waste is the toxin. So bacteria are eating. You notice that some of these, like Campylobacter, is hanging out in the intestine of an animal because that's where the food ends up. So they're eating off of the same food that we're eating, right? But then their waste product that they produce, as they go through that food is usually the toxin that's harmful to us. So in the case of botulism, it's very harmful. So ideally watch canned foods for any kind of like bulging, for any kind of growth. If it doesn't look right, it's not right. So what are some complicating factors? What are some things that are going to interfere with, or what are some things that are going to complicate people's protection? Older populations have a lower immune system in general, right? So they're more susceptible. People that use antibiotics all the time, they can create. Well, there's two things about this. They can create resistant bacteria that are pathogenic, or they can damage the good bacteria. So we have good bacteria in our body, and that can sometimes prevent the colonization of bad bacteria or pathogenic bacteria, right? So antibiotics they take out kind of all bacteria. Centralized food production. We have a convergence of food companies. A smaller number of food companies are producing more and more of our food, right? So there's some advantages to that, but a disadvantage is that when something gets into the supply, it affects a lot of people. We're importing things more now. So we import fruit and vegetables and salads and stuff like that from other countries. So we don't control the process. We tend to eat out. And we tend to like, there's been a movement recently to eat, especially things like fish, right? Like flash fry it, just get the outside of it kind of just cooked a little bit, but the inside more raw. Or we like to eat, hamburger. You don't want a dry hamburger, right? So you tend to get it like rare or medium rare. But with certain populations, you don't want to do that. You want to make sure things are cooked. But these are things that affect our likelihood to get one of these pathogens. And there are also parasites. Now, technically, all of these pathogens that we've been talking about are parasites. A parasite is anything that takes something from you and does not give you anything, right? But there's also this idea of parasites being like worms and things related to worms, right? So this is how we mean it when we talk about these four things. Trichinella spiralis. Trichinella is like it's found in pork. It's found in other things too, but I mean, we don't eat a lot of the other things where it's found, but pork we do. So uncooked pork, what happens is that the larvae comes in, you eat the larvae, and then the larvae is going to go into your muscle and make a cyst, right? And it's just going to wait for it to be introduced to somebody else's body, and then it'll move on, right? So that's what it did with the pig. And then we ate the pig uncooked, not cooked enough, undercooked. And then we get that larvae in us, right? And then it will go into our muscle and form a cyst. Toxoplasma. The big issue, like the practical issue, is that we find it in cat litter, because the feces from the cat carries it, right? And so this is an issue with pregnant women. But aside from that, you can find it in contaminated water and again in meat that's undercooked. Another one is tapeworms. So you see trichinella now and then. It's not a big one. Toxoplasma, again, it's more rare. Tapeworms, yes. I mean, you can find them. And most of the time, our stomach acid will kill off the tapeworms. That's in most people. But if you're older and you don't have the same acidity in your stomach, maybe it's not enough to kill the eggs of the tapeworms, right? So, and then last is Hep A, which is not necessarily, it's not like a worm parasite, it's a virus, but it can be, since we eat a lot of shellfish, it can be found in shellfish. And, why am I mentioning water contaminated with raw sewage? Because not all of our sewage gets treated like it should. So, and then you sometimes it mixes with sources of fresh water. And sometimes it gets onto crawfish or onto various shellfish, right? So again, cook. That's why we have to cook these things. And then lastly, there's environmental pollutants. I didn't really mention any of them because there's really a lot to discuss, and it's not, it's not as related to patient care, but a couple things to just be aware of. Lead, right? So old paint in the house, um, lead piping. You're mostly not going to find this anymore, but in older houses, you'll still find it, right? And that's going to compete for oxygen. It's not something that's going to make you acutely sick. This is more of a chronic issue, but it's something to look out for, right? Look at the pots and pans that are being used. Is there a lot of like flaky Teflon? Those all have an effect on, some of those are endocrine disruptors. Some of those mess with transcription factors, which influence our DNA. So that's something just to be aware of. Okay, so that was kind of like a brief introduction to food management and different contaminants of food. And, just in general, always go to that first slide. You know, cook it, make sure it's fully cooked, make sure it's reaching like 165, store things at like 40 degrees, wash your hands often, and wash fruits and vegetables, and don't cross-contaminate. Okay, there you go.